This is a warning about the future and the danger of disturbing the natural order of things. Before unleashing the potential horrors of innovation, consider the value of the status quo, of peace. The world might not be ready for your experiments or the price they'll have to pay for your bug-faced superheroes. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Sectaurs. Thank you to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY to get 30% off your order today. 80stees.com started off as the source for t-shirts inspired by all things pop culture from the 1980s, but there's more to the 80s than just the 80s. They've got shirts inspired by the 70s, the decade that paved the way for the 80s. They've got shirts inspired by the 90s, the decade that carried on the legacy of the 80s. They've got shirts inspired by the 2000s, because the 80s isn't just a decade, it's a state of mind. Whether your interests are laser focused on one thing, say movies, there's plenty of choices from Jaws to Shaun of the Dead. If your interests bounce around, they've got shirts from cartoons to video games, superheroes to music and wrestling. From Transformers to Dungeons & Dragons, Gollum to Ron Burgundy, Darkwing Duck to Powerpuff Girls, from Pong to Street Fighter II. Their goal is to have something for everyone that loves retro pop culture. Whether your favorite cartoon is Jem and the Holograms or Robotech, or your favorite movie is The Karate Kid or 16 Candles, you'll find something you love. Click the link below and use code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order today. Again, that's code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order. Thanks again to 80stees.com. We have previously covered Sectaurs back in January of 2018. We want to revisit it to tell a more comprehensive story and include all of the developments that have transpired since, because Sectaurs are back, baby, and almost exactly the way you remember them the first time. Sectaurs Warriors of Symbion is a toy line released by Coleco in 1985, supported by a comic book and a very brief animated series. Its only crime was timing. One of the most innovative toy designs in history, hitting shelves at the same time as the most innovative toy designs in history. In the far reaches of the universe is the star planet Symbion, a perfect world until their biological experiments exploded, creating an exotic realm beyond all belief. Two forces remain eternally at odds with each other, the beauty of the shining realm and the terror of the dark domain. As mutant life forms ravaged their global paradise, a new and incredible species emerged, the Sectaurs, able to telepathically bond with their insect companions in the ultimate battle for survival. The defenders of the Shining Realm are led by their mightiest hero, Prince Dargon. He's brash, bold, and resourceful, and when surrounded by enemies, Dragonflyer is always there to help him finish the fight. The terror troops of the Dark Domain are led by the Lord of Evil, General Spydrax, doing the bidding of Empress Devora to win control of the Hive's ancient fortresses that hold the keys to ultimate power. These are the Sectaurs, the Warriors of Symbion. Sectaurs was created by Tim Clark and Maureen Trotto in Lawrence, Mass. Sectaurs was created by Tim Clark, Maureen Trotto, and Lawrence, Mass. I used to work in Methuen, that's the next town over from Lawrence. In 1983, Tim Clark was a sculptor and designer working on Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock. He had previously worked on Henson's 1982 feature film The Dark Crystal. Those swirly lines on the mystic faces, the twinkle in Travelin' Matt's eye, that's the work of Tim Clark. Clark's job was not just to make puppets, but to create characters. As he tells the story, he approached Jim Henson about getting into toy design and development. Perhaps that was something the studio could pursue, especially since the Henson licensed toys that existed, to put it bluntly, weren't that great. Clark thought an internal, Henson studio-driven effort could be more inventive, more innovative, explore different materials, produce toys with a higher degree of fidelity to the characters and the spirit of Fraggle Rock or the Muppets, to which Henson replied, "I think it's a wonderful idea, I just don't want to do it." Clark says that was the motivation he needed to start looking into it for himself. He'd had a taste of working on toys during his time on Dark Crystal. Hasbro was developing a line of action figures, but it was never released. But it was through Hasbro's collaboration with Henson and Dark Crystal that Clark met Maureen Trotto, who was working as a sculptor for Hasbro on those figures. After he was done on Fraggle Rock and he was officially a freelance staffer, he and Trotto started working on their own toy concepts to pitch to toy companies. Unfortunately, most toy companies weren't interested in dealing with designers they had never worked with before. There were liability issues. How could they be sure that this was your original idea and that you didn't steal it from someone else? Instead of pitching directly to companies like Hasbro and Mattel, Clark and Trotto reached out to a licensing company called 7 Towns, founded in Lawrence, London, by Tom Kramer in 1963. Their biggest claim to fame was helping Erno Rubik bring the Rubik's Cube to market in 1980. Names can get you places previously inaccessible, and so it was Clark's time with Jim Henson and the Muppets that got him in the door to 7 Towns, working with New York-based agent Lawrence "Larry" Mass. Clark and Trotto pitched as many ideas as Larry was willing to listen to. As Clark tells the story, at one point Clark pulled out a fly hand puppet that he made specifically to use at Halloween parties instead of wearing a mask. Masks prevent you from eating, it was hard to breathe, people couldn't see your face. But a spider hand puppet let him play a character. He could interact with other guests, put it on people's shoulders, pretend like it was alive, and make it appear to sip from their drinks. At Seven Towns, Larry had an immediate reaction to the spider. He admired its brilliant simplicity, but it was missing something. Larry knew, we gotta put an action figure on the back of that.
An experiment fails, and the Sectaurs warriors are born. Each warrior comes with his own telebonded insectoid that you control, like Bytor. Winged flies into the heat of battle. Rappler, with his grappling hook, carries his warrior up the cliff for a surprise attack. But Toxid launches a counterattack.
Warriors and insectoid sold as pairs, each pair sold separately.
Sectaurs by Coleco.
In 1984, Sectaurs found a dream partner with Coleco, who were still riding the high of successes like 1982's ColecoVision home video game system and 1983's Cabbage Patch Kids. Leaders in innovation and one of the hottest names in toys, Coleco had a history of adapting to new trends and evolving their business. Founded in 1932 as Connecticut Leather Company, they were boosted by demand for leather goods and shoe-adjacent products during World War II. By the 1970s, they were a $50 million business that included the acquisition of a snowmobile company. In 1976, they introduced their first home game system, the Coleco Telstar, which was essentially a Pong clone, drafting on Atari's success the year before. In an oversaturated market, they were one of the fortunate few to break even while so many others took losses. In 1982, they jumped back into home gaming with ColecoVision. They sold over 500,000 units in 1982 alone and followed that up with a literal pop culture phenomenon, the Cabbage Patch Kids. These dolls, and I'm not exaggerating this, made people hysterical, and not the ha-ha kind of hysterical.
Welcome to another holiday shopping season. When the doors opened at this Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania store, the pushing and shoving began. In
1983, Coleco sold nearly 3 million dolls and probably would have sold 1 million or 2 more if they had anticipated the, and I'm not making this up, manic frenzy for the product. That same year, they released the Coleco Atom home computer as an expansion device for the ColecoVision. Heading into 1985, Sectaurs was positioned as a flagship boys' toys product, and Coleco gave it full cross-marketing support to compete with He-Man, Transformers, and G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe. I don't know why I said it like I just hear it in Destro's voice, and Arthur Burkhart is in the cast. G.I. Joe. First would be the toys themselves, the key feature of the line being the large puppet insects inspired by Tim Clark's Halloween hand costume, billed as the world's first hands-in action figures were Prince Dargon with Dragonflyer, General Spydrax with Spiderflyer, Pinsor with Battle Beetle, and Skulk with Trancula. Each set came with a figure, a puppet mount, accessories, a pack-in mini-comic. Some had gorgeous battery-operated flapping iridescent wings, some incorporated fur and translucent plastics, each one built around a glove that transformed the user's hand into the legs and mandibles of the giant insects. Other figures were released at a lower price point with smaller companion insects who had their own unique action features, like squirting water or push-button chomping, Commander Waspax with Winged, Mantis with Grappler, glow-in-the-dark night-fighting Dargon with Parafly, Skeeto with Toxid, and Zack with Bytor. I f***ed up in rehearsal, I got it right here. To top it off, the Hive, one of the biggest playsets ever, standing 34 inches tall and packed with 2 playable puppet bugs, a trapdoor trick bridge, rotating machine gun, and a swinging wrecking ball. Next up was a comic book series published by Marvel Comics, a regular in the toy-based mythology partnerships. Marvel published comics for Hasbro's G.I. Joe and Transformers, as well as Remco's Crystar. Sectaurs Warriors of Symbion was written by Bill Mantlo and initially illustrated by Mark Teixeira. Steve Geiger took over the art in issue 3. It ran 8 issues every other month from June of 1985 to September of 1986, and featured a story that was similar but different from the animated series, as the 2 productions were developed simultaneously but by different teams without any coordination between the 2. Sectaurs Warriors of Symbion was a 5-episode miniseries produced by Ruby Spears, the folks behind shows like Thundar the Barbarian, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Dragon's Lair, as well as Turbo Teen, Mr. T, and Rubik the Amazing Cube. That's Turbo Teen, Mr. T, and Rubik the Amazing Cube. 3 different shows. Can you imagine? Sectaurs aired in September of 1985 with an opening narration that told the story of the downfall of the planet Symbion, their perfect world forever changed by biological experiments gone wrong, an exotic realm, mutants, a new species, warriors of the Shining Realm, and the terror troops of the Dark Domain. The cast was packed with 80s cartoon all-stars including Dan Gilvezan as Prince Dargon, Arthur Burghart as General Spydrax, Peter Cullen as Mantor, Neil Ross as Waspax, B.J. Ward as Stellara, and Frank Noises-on Welker as Skulk. Sectaurs were featured on puzzles, school supplies, sticker books, storybooks, coloring books, TV, dinner trays, and more. Coleco made every effort to give Sectaurs a fighting chance. There was no reason to believe that it wouldn't be just as successful as Masters of the Universe. There was nothing like Sectaurs on the toy shelves, and yet there was so much on the shelves. From the arrival of Star Wars toys in 1977 through the launch of Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe in 1982, and toy lines like GoBots and Transformers in 1984, toy companies were actively pushing the boundaries of toy gimmicks. The deregulation of kids' television by the Reagan administration resulted in dozens of new properties all fighting for kids' time in front of the TV, hoping to drive them to the toy aisle or to dazzle them with something new and different once they were there. Star Wars, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers, GoBots, Superpowers, Secret Wars, Voltron, Jason the Wheeled Warriors, Thundercats, Mask, Battle Beasts, Centurions, Inhumanoids, Robotech, Bionic 6, Bravestar, Laser Tag, not to mention the US launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System just a few short months later in 1986. From a sheer volume standpoint, there were too many options, all battling for the same dollars, each with their own cartoons and comic books and licensed merchandise. Sectaurs was just another ripple in the ocean. Combine that with a higher than average price point and a degree of insect realism that creeped out enough parents, and Coleco was in a tight spot.
Damn, we're in a tight spot. Damn, we're in a tight spot. Damn, we're in a tight spot.
That said, in the end, it wasn't the gross out factor or the lack of sales that doomed Sectaurs, it was Coleco itself, always trying to grow, always trying to expand into other markets. In 1986, Coleco purchased board game manufacturer Sell Cow and Ryder, makers of Parcheesi, Scrabble, and Trivial Pursuit. Coleco paid 75 million Cabbage Patch bucks for the 120-year-old company just as Cabbage Patch sales were trailing off, just as the Nintendo Entertainment System nuked interest in board games, just as they took 50 million in losses from the failed Atom home computer.
Is that legal?
Sectaurs could have been one of the biggest lines of the 80s. Instead, the planned second wave was canceled, the comic ended at issue 8, and the 5-episode miniseries was the end for the brand on TV. 2 years later in 1988, Coleco filed for bankruptcy. A year later in 1989, Hasbro scooped up the remaining pieces. Hasbro, till all are one. 30 years later in 2018, Zika Toys launched a Kickstarter for a new line of Sectaurs action figures. This was made possible by the fact that Sectaurs never technically belonged to Coleco, therefore weren't assimilated by Hasbro. It was owned by 7 towns, licensed out to whoever wanted to make stuff. Zika's Kickstarter brought in $54,000 from 598 backers, including me. Wave 1 featured Prince Dargon, General Spydrax, Mantor, and Zack, as well as new army builder troops like Royal Guards of the Shining Realm and Skull Soldiers from the Dark Domain. Conspicuously absent were the hands-in puppets that were the trademark of the original line. While many fans were excited about the potential for any modern Sectaurs items, others refused to buy in without a guarantee that Zika would, at some point, attempt to make puppet mounts as well. Wave 1 was delivered to backers in 2020, and in January of 2021, Zika launched a second Kickstarter for Wave 2, which would have brought additional characters into the line: Pinsor, Commander Waspax, Skulk, and Skeeto. Unfortunately, the campaign fell short of its goal. Hard to say which factored in more, the uncertainty of the global pandemic at the time, or fans' insistence not to back the line without puppets. Zika's rights to the license expired a few months later in July of 2021. A mere 365 days later, give or take, I'm not doing the math, in April of 2022, the Nacelle company announced that they were bringing Sectaurs back again, another known property added to their toy production wing alongside RoboForce, Power Lords, The Great Garloo, and the Marks Toys brand. In an exclusive long-term agreement with 7 towns, Nacelle plans to release a line of action figures, consumer products, and an animated series. For Sectaurs, that means new figures almost identical to the original figures with more articulation and new materials. As of this video, no puppets. As of this video, Wave 1 features Prince Dargon and Stellara, who would have been released in Wave 2 if the original line had continued. Pre-orders are currently live at various online retailers. If all goes well, Wave 2 will likely feature General Spydrax and Bandor, another previously unreleased figure. Sectaurs was an original concept bolstered by good versus evil fantasy adventure that tapped directly into kids' fascination with bugs, large-scale action figures with swords and shields and guns, and all the holsters and sheaths needed to store them. Cut short before the line could push the bounds of innovation even further, they're back to try again. With the flexibility of a license still managed by the original creators in the hands of people who grew up with the original toys, the future may still be a shining realm for the warriors of Symbion. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you would like early access to the videos ad-free, as well as behind-the-scenes features, sneak peeks at upcoming projects, an exclusive monthly podcast about the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy and let us know in the comments down below if you're a fan of Sectaurs. Did you have the hands-in puppets? Have you acquired them since? Did you back the Zika Toys Kickstarter? Are you ready for the new nacelle figures? Can you imagine a world where puppets killed action figures the way streaming killed home video? The Boba set would be a whole different thing. All those puppets.